Ming collapsed. The Hideyoshi experiment went nowhere, ended in tears and defeat. Joseon was the one that survived. And that says something about the internal cohesion that was there, the ability to survive disasters when inflicted on the country.
한국을 콕 집어서 의로운 나라라고 말하는 조선시대의 역사를 면밀하게 짚어낸 세계적 석학 오드 아른의 교수. 하버드와 런던대를 거쳐 예일대학교에서 교수로 재직 중인 그가 하버드에서 초청받아 열변을 토하며 조선의 놀라운 점에 대해 설명합니다. 그가 조선을 성공한 국가라고 말하는 이유는 대체 무엇일까요? 오늘은 저번 화에 이어 오드 아른의 교수의 강의를 전해드리겠습니다.
And that goes beyond just the issue of who we are in a kind of ethnic sense. I'll try to avoid using the term ethnic in these lectures, but I'll use it as a one-off here. The concept of the Korean state as being particularly preoccupied with righteousness is something that goes through generations of political philosophers and political leaders within Korea. Because it is possible, and Koreans, both during the Ming and the Qing eras, were sometimes attacked by the Chinese for this. It is interesting how this character has become a slogan for various Korean political projects over a period at least of the 600 years that I'm talking about here. So the Popular Army in the operation against the Japanese invasions in the 1580s called themselves the Righteous Army, or Uibyong. And you will find it in the resistance against Japan in the 20th century, and you find it in numerous political upheavals in South Korea towards the end of the 20th century. So it is a significant concept. No more important breaking point than the late 14th century, where you have these two new states that emerge almost simultaneously. First, the Ming Empire in the 1360s, and then the Joseon Empire or state in Korea in the 1380s and 1390s. But if the Ming was a great project, Joseon in Korea was even more of a project, was even more of a break with the past and an attempt to put something new in its place. The Joseon state, the Joseon dynasty, was in its essence a Neo-Confucian project. It was not an entire break with Korea's past. It built on Korea's past to quite some extent. But it was an attempt at refining, finessing, and first and foremost ordering the way the state behaved and how people lived their lives within this state. It was nothing less than the remaking of Korean society according to the principles of Neo-Confucianism. In a very authoritarian form, led by the elites, very, very hierarchical, but crucially, and this is what is different from almost any other Neo-Confucian projects across East Asia, and there were many of them, based on the voluntary or involuntary participation of almost everyone within Korean society. And that was, I think, because it turned out to be a very successful project, that's what gave it such deep roots. Of course, there were groups that were excluded from any concept of Confucian rectitude. Korea was a caste system, it was a slave-holding system, which I'll talk more about later on, so there were people who were excluded. But among the people who had some form of franchise in terms of participation, this was expected to be universal. The emphasis were on concepts such as harmony, hierarchy, family, self-cultivation for the elite, and learning. And of course, righteousness. The concept of righteousness as put at the center of it. Moral fitness to be able to make decisions. So in that sense, from its very beginning in the late 14th century and up to its end in the early 20th century, the Joseon state was an ideologically driven state. So I said that this was a successful project. And I do believe that it really was. I mean, successful in the sense not of any kind of particular fitness for rule or governance, but because it was able to imprint itself so deeply on the population that it ruled. And it was successful also in another sense. It created a state that had a great deal of capacity in various forms. And this is something that's often forgotten when we talk about Korea during these years, for reasons that I'll come to in a second, mainly its relationship with the Ming and Qing empires. One tends to forget the ability of Korean rulers to cling on to power, to have a successful state that continued for a very long period of time. Socially unjust, as it was, as I already alluded to, and with enormous problems in terms of at least some aspects of innovation. The best example, I think, of its successfulness on its own terms was that it survived the biggest challenge of its time, of this first period that we are talking about here, which was the great East Asian wars of the late 16th and early 17th century. So what you could call East Asia's World War. First with the Japanese attempt under Toyotomi Hideyoshi at taking over Korea and possibly also having in mind taking over at least significant parts of Ming China, and then the Qing attempts at controlling Korea, and the Jurchen, Manchu, Qing attempts at controlling Korea in the 1620s and the 1630s. For a region that saw itself as a world, quite rightly, this was a world war. And it was an enormously testing experience for all the polities that were involved. Two of them didn't survive. And surprisingly enough, the one who did was Korea, was Joseon Korea. Ming collapsed. The Hideyoshi experiment went nowhere, ended in tears and defeat. Joseon was the one that survived. And that says something about the internal cohesion that was there, the ability to survive disasters when inflicted on the country. Possibly also, and this is something I'd love for us to discuss later on, because the concept of state was slightly different, maybe for the very reason that Korea was not an empire. Was it possible to get some kind of continuity beyond this, as Yahuin Kim Habush has underlined in her writings.
명나라도 망하고 도요토미 히데요시 역시 실패했지만 조선만큼은 오랫동안 살아남은 이유를 오드 아르네 교수는 한국인들의 결집력이라 말합니다. 오늘 이야기 어떻게 보셨나요? 저는 세계적 석학마저 감탄한 한국인들의 정신에 대해 새삼 감탄했는데요. 다음에도 또 좋은 내용으로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 오늘도 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다.